Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 5 of The Horse and His Boy, Prince Corin, who is actually not the boy that the horse is talking about. It kind of made it sound like the horse and his boy, comma, Prince Corin.
Right. Yeah, that's a clear distinction there.
Yes, the aforementioned boy is Shasta, who actually we spend most of our time. Actually, we really don't. The whole first half of this chapter, he's not around a ton. I mean,
Right.
he's like standing awkwardly in the scene.
Yeah, he's observing. We're kind of, in a way, seeing it through his eyes.
Yeah, it's a kind of a neat little trick that Lewis is doing there.
Yeah.
Anything we should talk about in these last 4 chapters before we just jump right into a chapter where we get to see a lot of familiar faces?
I believe we have an addendum.
Well, I just had a short addendum that I thought this weird connection that I made, and then I looked it up and I was like, oh, this actually makes sense. Talking about how Shasta, kind of just is like there throughout this scene. I was talking about this, I think with Anna, or I don't know. I was talking about it recently about how he was just kind of like awkwardly standing there, and actually how it relates to some of the things that have been happening in my class, which is that we're here recording this at the end of the school year, and some of my students are reading Hamlet right now. And, we read it out loud, and they pick the characters. They fight over who gets to be who. It's hilarious. And my favorite thing is when a character comes into a scene, but then doesn't have any lines. Like, they just stand there, and a kid gets really excited. This sounds awful for me as a teacher, but so I was like, oh, yes, I'm here. And then, 5 lines later, oh, I exit. Oh.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Claudius was just telling me to go send a message to someone. I'm not actually doing something.
I think one of the hardest roles to play would be where you're a character who's presenting the play and you're supposed to be watching it. So you have to act the entire time like you are interested in watching the play that you've probably seen 200 times after rehearsal.
Have you ever had a camera on you for? I feel like this all the time with Zoom, where it's like you have to, everyone's watching you spectate yourself.
Right.
I hate that feeling.
Yeah, you can turn that off.
We've been in person, so it's different for us. So as far as school wise, but
also it's very validating to know that you are there.
Yeah, and I think more of when this is about a year ago now, that when we would get on Zoom with family members and other places and stuff, and be like, well, I just feel like even though it'd be 2 other people talking, I'm just awkwardly sitting there, yeah. It's what I would usually do, but usually people don't watch me if I'm not the one dialoguing or something.
Right.
But so no, here's the actual addendum. So I was thinking about Hamlet, and maybe about a week or so ago we went through Act 3 Scene 1. Anyone familiar with Hamlet would know that this is the big to be or not to be soliloquy that Hamlet gives, and came across a phrase as we were reading it that I was like, I've heard that recently and no one says that.
Was it when you were playing Battleship?
It was. I don't get the joke. To be. Oh, that's a good one, bud. I like that. No, no, it's not Battleship. But instead, it was this phrase, there's the rub. Hamlet says that. And I was like, no one says that. Yeah. So where have I come across that? And it turns out in just the last chapter, if you were to turn back 1 page, this is what Edmund says that leads us into this conversation that starts this chapter of, oh, wait a second, Susan, when you reject the Prince of Tashbaan, we're going to be in big trouble. And Phil is now currently looking back to the page to see if this is true or not.
Well, it was incorrect.
What
it's not on the page, on the last page.
Okay,
it's on the second to last page.
Second to last. Okay, you have 4 lines on that one. In my book, it was the next page right behind it. And I did not do research here. I usually would. Usually go, oh, I wonder if Lewis is pulling from that. Is that a phrase that people say a lot, and you and I, maybe it was used kind of a couple centuries ago and it just doesn't come around? Is this some, phrase that, oh, Lewis is clearly pulling on Hamlet? I don't know. And I didn't want to do research because I want to spoil myself here.
Right.
But I just thought that was interesting. I feel like there has to be some kind of connection unless I wonder if there is some kind of connection unless there's the rub is some kind of English phrase that is commonly said that you and I are just unaware of.
Not that I know of. Having worked in the restaurant industry for just a little bit of time, that was a phrase when we were looking for the spice mixture to put on the steak. But I'm not sure if they.
I don't know if that's what
over
they
there.
were talking about in that situation.
It's like, where is it? There's the rub. Oh, thank you.
Oh, there it is. I was
now I
looking
can
for it. Yeah.
complete my task.
So I don't know. I thought it was interesting. Maybe any of our listeners, I am not a Shakespearean scholar or anything like that. So maybe other people might know a little bit more about this. But I just thought I'd mention it because it was something that came up just in the a page ago in the book. So, but we should go ahead and get into chapter 5 here, where we get to meet Prince Corin and we get to even see friends like Mr. Tumnus, Edmund, Susan. I think that's it. I sound like I was going to go on with more, but I think it's just those 3. There's a new Raven. I like that guy.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. But why don't I go ahead? It's an odd chapter, so it's my turn to give the chapter summary. Shasta listens as the Narnians argue about how they should escape the city. King Edmund believes that they will not be peacefully set free if Queen Susan rejects the prince. After a long discussion, Mr. Tumnus concludes that they should pretend to throw a party on their ship docked in the harbor. This way, they will have an excuse to make preparations on their ship. Before the party, however, the Narnians will then flee on their ship back to their home. After listening to this conversation, Shasta heads to bed. He awakes to see a boy that looks exactly like him. This boy identifies himself as the real Prince Corin, who got into a bit of trouble in the city. Shasta and Corin exchange a few words before Shasta leaves out the exact same window that Corin just entered from.
Well done. I think you covered all the main points there.
All the main points. Yeah, it was, this whole chapter takes place over the course of what do we think? Like a couple of hours? And
it
most
seems
of
like it, because you have to incorporate the nap, and then it has to be...
It's late in the eve, or like maybe early morning.
Even more than a few hours, because the light's starting to come up when Corin comes
true.
back.
But, over half of this chapter is just that conversation that I mentioned between the Narnians, kind of like, what do we do next? And I really like this.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
I think that one of the things we'll talk about a little bit as we go on is Lewis has this amazing ability to make the speech sound different when they're older and they're a little more experienced, but it's still readable. And I don't think this would have been as confusing as I'm imagining as a kid. Mm-hmm. It's just when people are talking like that, it felt really different at the end of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, when they were using extremely fancy language, but they had been there a lot longer.
Yeah.
They had forgotten how to talk like regular people.
That's what I was thinking. There is more time. Is this something that it's not like, overnight they just pick up this? Is it a more kind of natural way of obtaining an accent, right? Or losing an accent? Because even Anna, having grown up in a rural part of North Carolina, she had a really strong Southern accent. Like when I see videos and stuff of her from high school, and I mean, she's been on the show before. She has like maybe some of a Southern, at least from maybe other people feel like it's really strong, but I'm like, yeah, she is a little bit. Sometimes it comes out, but not as much. And she went to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and when she was there, she just was around a lot of people who didn't have Southern accents, and she was like, it just kind of went away,
Right. So yeah, maybe a result of how long they've been there or the number of people that they interact with. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, is there any indication of how much time has passed?
Yeah, I went to our friends over at Narnia Web. So, okay, let's take Susan, for instance, because she's the oldest here in this scene. Susan, at the end of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, before the time jump. So, like, when she's crowned Queen Susan, she's 12. She is now, as of The Horse and His Boy, 26.
Whoa.
So a lot of time has passed. Yeah. And she will go back to... if we go back to Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe now, at 27 is when they go back into the wardrobe. So there's only 1 year before they go back. So we are actually at the end of their reign.
Something must happen in this next year that makes them talk really funny.
Yeah. I almost wonder if that is Lewis. Obviously he'd already written the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe before he wrote this, but maybe the in-universe explanation. No, this isn't even in-universe, though. Maybe just the explanation we could go with is it really helps create a stark contrast between the children we meet in the beginning of Wardrobe and then who they are as they go back. You go, oh, wow, they really have changed. A lot of time has passed. Because you're right, the dialogue here is not nearly as formal as it is at the end of Wardrobe.
Right. But the point of all this is, for the extended dialogue, considering this is aimed at younger readers, it is really nice how readable it is.
Yeah, it really is. It's enjoyable to hear them, talk casually with one another, to see the ways in which they've grown. It's this weird, it isn't, but it's one of those weird, science fiction time travel things, especially for Edmund, because we have seen Edmund grow up in a different, this is an Edmund that no longer exists in a way.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, he does exist, but when they go back into the wardrobe, this 25-year-old, fancy-speaking Edmund isn't there anymore. He goes back to being a 10-year-old boy, and he grows up from there. And that's the Edmund we've traveled with most, through Caspian and then into Dawn Treader. So it is just this weird, I feel like I know this character, but they also feel really foreign to me. I felt a little bit less like that with Susan just because we haven't spent as much time with her. But Edmund, it almost was jarring in a way.
Yeah, that's interesting. Huh. Yeah, I don't even know how you would handle that. I think that if you tried to handle that and address it, it could be really interesting and incredibly hard to follow.
Yeah, I mean that's not the way at all that Lewis has approached Narnia. So I'm not expecting him to address that, but it was just something that I thought of here. So any other thoughts though before we actually start talking about what's happening in this chapter?
No, let's dive in.
Let's dive in. So the chapter begins with Shasta just kind of standing by and listening to this conversation between the Narnians. Edmund, if you recall in the very last chapter, said they had a big problem. And he said that problem is that the prince that they are going here to see, that Susan is not engaged to, but there has been kind of this talk of marriage back and forth. He is not going to be very happy when Susan declines his offer, although we don't know if there's been a formal offer or not, but it's definitely out there informally, although it could have been a formal offer. I don't think that's been established one way or the other. And that when they say, hey, thanks, but no thanks, Edmund's like, it's all going to go south. They have no reason to keep us here. He's he's already a pretty angry guy. He does not seem to have a lot of integrity. Mr. Tumnus ate with one of the leaders as well. He had dinner with a different leader the night before, and that leader was like, oh, well, you guys will definitely get to go back to Narnia as long as you leave us a bride for the prince. This kind of hey, everything's great. I know there's a little bit of tension here, these kind of two cultures coming together. Everything's great as long as you give us Susan, and then we're good.
Yeah.
So he's like, we've got kind of a problem here.
It's a tense situation, and they're trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah, they're trying to figure out what to do.
And the main thing, it turns out, that they really need to do is they need to get on their ship. Once they can get to the ship, they're pretty confident they can get away. Yeah,
Tumnus comes in, and you know what? I really liked this from Tumnus because we really haven't seen much of Mr. Tumnus outside of chapter 2 of Wardrobe, right? I mean, he's a little bit there at the end of chapter 1. I guess he shows up at the courtyard with all the statues, but he has a couple of lines. Yeah. Besides that, we haven't talked to him.
Right.
This is probably more dialogue than he's ever had.
Yeah.
Outside,
He's probably thrilled.
So it's really cool to see him in this post-White Witch, world. Just kind of see who's become. It's been well over a decade at this point since he first met the children. I love that they're still really close together. He seems to be some kind of advisor to the monarchs here. And he comes forward with, he does acknowledge, along with, I think there's a dwarf there as well, too. Like you said, Phil, we've just got to get down to the ship. We cannot put off a fight. Yeah, we've got fighters here. And there's that interesting quote that maybe the Raven or the dwarf gives. Let's see if I can find it here.
Is it about the lobster?
That one too. Tell us about that. Remind me about that one.
Every phrase seems to have a little bit of a rhyme and seems to be a roundabout way of saying the information. And they always have to translate it, which is part of what Lewis is probably doing. He's probably saying the phrase and then also having the character explain what it means.
You know what? And actually, before we go into that, I'm looking here at my copy of the book, and there's something else I want to talk about first. And that is the politics of the Narnian world. Really just more the international relations that I want to get into here. Because, and obviously, we all know the answer before we get into it, which is that there aren't a lot of answers, and Lewis leaves almost everything very open-ended here. But I am somewhat interested, as a first-time reader, in the relationship between Narnia, Archenland, and Calormen, especially with the line that Edmund gives saying that Narnia is a little land. I never considered that.
Yeah, because you've only seen that map.
Well,
Right?
no, but even in that map, so I did go back. I looked at the Pauline Baines map, and Calormen does look larger than Narnia. But Narnia doesn't look that much smaller.
Yeah.
But as I thought about this more and thought about, a lot of the big questions I've had over the maps and where is everything, it actually makes sense to think of Narnia as a small little country. And if we think about Calormen as this quite large empire, right, I start to get maybe a better picture of the dynamics between these two cultures. Edmund says talking about the leader of the Calormens, although I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, is Tashbaan the capital of Calormen?
That was my understanding.
That's what it appears.
It seemed to be
me
at
too.
least the commercial center, if not the capital.
So one of their leaders here, he says, and I think they're actually talking more about the prince here. It's the prince that Edmund's talking about. He says he longs to blot them out, meaning Narnia, and gobble them up, talking about all these other little lands on the border of his great empire. So we see this almost like imperialism coming out of the Calormens, which is really interesting. I went back and looked at this, and we're not going to get into all the details of this kind of stuff. That's not what we do on this show. But I went to Joseph Pierce, and I very carefully read, and Joseph Pierce, in his book Further Up and Further In, he argues that this is actually, he believes this is Lewis taking kind of an anti-imperialist stand in the Narnia books, that Narnia, kind of this small country, is the one kind of fighting back against this large empire who's almost in some ways, kind of colonizing or imperializing throughout. We don't really have a name for this magical land where all these countries exist. But talked about that and how much of that was really a stance maybe not a lot of people would have taken in the middle of the 20th century, especially in England, where you have, obviously, you're moving past the Victorian age at this point when he's writing in the 50s. You're well past that. But it's still very much in the cultural collective when you think of collective consciousness.
It's also interesting looking back, that was when things started to decline in a rapid way.
Yeah, and I think, a couple of episodes ago, it's probably been a couple of months ago at this point since we had Dr. Marcos on the show. He mentioned just how much of an impact the World War I and World War II had on children's literature. But we really can't. It had a great impact on everything, including even kind of approaches to what the countries were. That's where you start seeing the decline of this large British Empire. You see colonization become, especially European colonization, become less and less desirable for some of those European nations that had long kind of, colonized other parts of the world. And so it's interesting that Lewis kind of makes, you would think, because so often Narnia has been this very much, it's these English kids that go into this magical world, and a lot of these books are quite English in and of themselves. You almost would assume Narnia would maybe be the great empire, if it's maybe mirroring the British Empire, especially of the Victorian age, but it's not. In fact, it almost seems flipped, and that's an interesting thing to do. I haven't read a lot of Lewis's thoughts on the politics, and for the most part, Lewis, for what I understand, really kind of stood out and stood away, tried to get himself away from a lot of the more political issues, even nuanced ones or ones that, he maybe or may not have been passionate about. He kind of felt like, hey, I'm really focused on this mere Christianity. I'm not super interested in taking a more like polemic approach to everything or to anything, which I think is very wise on his part. We've tried to do that, quite a bit on our show as well, too, is be really focused on loving the books of Narnia and just really only focused on that.
Right. Yeah.
Well, with a lot of sidetracks to Star Wars and Marvel and all these other things.
Right. We were very opinionated on things outside of the books of Narnia.
Sure. I also just want to mention, too, as I read in that book, that Pierce also brought up what I had mentioned in the first episode as we talked about the Calormens and some of the cultural conflicts that they come across with the Narnians. And he mentioned what I had said, which is that a lot of the conflict between the Calormens and the Narnians reflects, in many ways, the Crusades of the Middle Ages, right? And in some ways, we talked about this idea that there are some characteristics of the Calormans, especially as people from larger Muslim empires in the Middle Ages, but there's other things that obviously are just not close at all. For instance, the Calormans are polytheistic, and a huge tenet of the Muslim faith is, and one of the 5 pillars is monotheism, you know? So really, really interesting to think more about how this is a reflection of Lewis kind of going back to the Crusades and thinking about that.
What's interesting about all this is he is definitely pulling from influences, but it's not cut and dry. It's not just one influence. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio where, hey, this group equals this group.
Yeah.
He's pulling things and he's mixing them together, which makes it a little bit more interesting, but also could possibly break down. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah.
Well, can I ask you one question before we continue on with this story?
Sure.
You know, as we hear kind of Edmund and Susan and Mr. Tumnus kind of plan out how are we going to escape and stuff, there's this weird lack of tension for us because we're all well aware that they must escape somehow.
Right.
Now, we don't know how. At least I legitimately don't know how they're going to escape because they haven't escaped by the end of this chapter. But I know they're going to escape. I've seen them past this point in time. I wanted to ask you, Phil, because I feel like I'm not going to say what I feel like. I'll ask you. How do you feel about stories where we already know the ending?
I'm glad you asked. I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Please.
Yes. So I think that early on, it is really fun. Maybe in elementary school, middle school, even high school, it is fun to go into something and you don't know how it is going to end and you're surprised and there's a delight there. However, there are some things in a story that just work better if it's structured a certain way.
Can you give me an example?
Every movie ever. Every American movie
what?
ever. Almost every American movie
what do you
that
mean?
is going to be really popular and make a lot of movies.
Like
make a lot
moolah.
of sequels.
Yeah.
Make a lot of money.
Okay.
Is going to have a happy ending. Now, that's not true for art house type things or anything independent. But most movies that you go into are going to have a happy ending.
Okay.
Or they're going to be split up into 2 parts because the first movie is going to have a negative ending and then they're going to have the second part come out a year later. And
Like you're thinking blockbusters for the most part.
Right.
Okay.
Things that are going to make
millions of dollars.
Millions of dollars and be at the top of the chart.
Okay.
Now, I'm not saying every story is going to have a happy ending, but for the most part.
You're kind of saying what the rule is. You might not be talking about the exceptions. There
Right.
are always going to be exceptions, but your rule is like, no, they're mostly are happy.
Right. In our culture, we tend to like the happy endings. So there's a lot of, when you go into a movie, you kind of have to suspend, along with disbelief, the fact that you know that it's probably going to work out. For me, once you accept that, then you can think, okay, now I'm curious how they're going to get there. And sometimes I go and I see a story and it's very clearly influenced by something or it's an adaptation of a book. You know what the ending is going to be. It's still fun to see how it is going to happen. And you can partake, quote, forget that it's going to happen that way. I've also found a lot of joy in reading the outline of something or reading like not exactly the plot summary, but getting a sense of something by maybe reading a Wikipedia article or reading someone's like 30-page essay or listening. We've been listening to a lot of the great lectures recently, listening to an entire lecture on something and then going and reading the original work. And you're no longer caring about the ending of something. Yeah. You're caring about the little details and, oh, wow, I didn't even notice that before. I had a teacher in, I think, freshman or sophomore year, and he told the class that whenever he gets a book, he reads the ending. I think that's a little bit extreme, but he doesn't want to read the book if it doesn't have a good ending. But once he knows it, then he's curious how they got there.
That's a really interesting point. I'm glad to hear that. I'm also happy too because I've been trying to get you into Homer and you've been reading the Iliad. And especially when you go into classic works of fiction. And I'm not even talking classic over 2,000 years ago, like with Homer, for instance, but even something written 50 years ago, like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? When I think of my son, I guess at some point he'll have to find out that Aslan dies and comes back to life. But
you already read it to him, right?
I've already read it once. And I am eventually like, okay, well, maybe when we read it again when he's like 3 or 4 and I read it out loud to him or something, it might be a surprise, but it's one of those things where it just won't be a surprise because it's always been there with you. I mean, I always felt that way with Empire. Like Darth Vader, I was like, well, I don't remember not seeing it.
Yeah.
Like I was 4 or 5 when I watched Star Wars for the first time. And then we went into, I actually watched Star Wars, then Jedi, then Empire.
Whoa.
That's the way the VHSs were. That's I think they just were out of order at our house. So I was like, I guess this one's next. I don't know. My parents were the one that put it in, but I do know I saw it in order, and it was fine. And especially with, like you said, like with the Iliad, it's actually important to know that you're ending with the funeral for Hector. You know, spoiler alert, guys, it was written in the 8th century BC, or 8th century.
Almost 3,000 years.
So, my apologies. Achilles kills Hector at the end of the Iliad, and then he desecrates his body, and then we're not going to get into all of it. But what's interesting. The reason I bring this up is because you and I have made a big point on this show of like staying away from spoilers. The whole big aspect of this season is I don't know what happens next.
Right.
You have been that way with all the other books, and you will with the final 2 books. And so I think there is, I want to say this before I kind of share my thoughts. I do think there is something really great about experiencing a story for the first time, and especially being surprised by a story for the first time. But I think we, especially in our kind of modern 21st century culture, especially here in the West, are like obsessed with not being spoiled. Mm-hmm. And it's this, I've been thinking about this a lot, just about how, so for instance, when I first read Beowulf with 6th graders, I go, hey guys, we're going to read a book called Beowulf, and it ends with Beowulf's death. And everyone's like, oh, you told us the book. Yeah. I'm like, no, seriously, actually knowing that he dies at the end will be better for all of us as we read this. I was like, you'll be able to pick up on a lot of the other subtext. We'll pick up on foreshadowing. It's actually helpful to know that he's going to be killed by a dragon, And I think the same thing about a lot of things that I love, even modern movies, TV shows, and as I thought about this, I do think that so much of the content that we consume is just so disposable. Let me get on a soapbox for a second. I know that we don't usually do this on the show, but I get frustrated with, I'll say it, like something like any kind of like Netflix show that comes out, you digest it in 1 week, and then you wait another year or so till the next season comes out, and you talk about it again then, and that's it. And it's all extremely just this kind of one-time experience. You don't go back to it. Like, I feel like that's mostly like what Netflix does with so much of their original content, which is why I'm increasingly less and less excited about them producing Narnia, because I'm worried it's something they're going to be like, hey, it's not something we want to stick around for a long time to come. It's something that we want you to just enjoy over a long week, and it gets talked about, it's all over Twitter or whatever, and then we all forget about it. And because it's this kind of like one-time experience, it almost is like you don't want to be spoiled, because then that ruins that one-time experience. But when we look at works, for instance, works of literature like The Horse and His Boy or The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, those things are things that get beautiful and greater the more we go back to them. I mean, how often have you heard someone talk about something they love and say, it every time I go back to it, I find something new. Right. There's all something that every one of our listeners can think of something. They're like, every time I go back to this, whether it's a movie, TV show, book, comic book, whatever, you go, I find something new and I love it more. And I think we've lost some of that. I'm not someone who go, oh, poo, everything's worse than it used to be. No. I'm not like that. Oh, I long for the great old days. But I do think that there is an aspect, especially the way we consume media, that makes everything so disposable after it's over. That's why we're so obsessed with not being spoiled, because it ruins that one-time experience for you.
To that hit of dopamine or whatever it is when you get the surprise. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
The opposite of all that is the perennial seller, the thing that is going to keep selling no matter what. And this is every fantasy section at every Barnes and Noble is always going to have a new version of the Lord of the Rings that you can buy. We're probably going to have a copy of Dune. There are going to be some other things there. I know you're not as a big a fan of Dune, but there are just there are certain books that are going to stay there for a long time. And I think that the Chronicles of Narnia are definitely up there with that. And what makes it nice is you can go back and you can continue to explore it all.
Well, even talking about this idea of like the perennial seller, you even think about how if you go to that fantasy section of Barnes & Noble, there's going to be a brand new book that has just come out that is the farmer boy becomes the wizard or whatever kind of thing. There's some stories that just deeply resonate with us, right? And so you might know the ending. Okay, let's do Marvel, because we haven't talked about a Marvel movie in one episode. So with Endgame, I think everybody knew, spoilers for a movie that came out a couple of years ago, I think everybody knew going in, all the characters that disappeared in the last movie are going to come back at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe someone didn't, but I think everyone's like, no, we just, spent billions of dollars to buy Spider-Man, and Black Panther was a huge movie, and in Infinity War, we just vanished them off away, and that was fun.
They have all these amazing characters, and you expect to just brush them under the rug.
No one believed that, but there was still buzz in the room because it's like, how are they going to do this? And I think that's this idea of, I think that's what we really love about stories, and I think that's maybe the healthy compromise. And not that either one's bad. Like, there are some things that I love. I'll never forget that first time watching Lost through and being like, what is happening?
Yeah.
And
then when you finish Lost and you're still kind of wondering what happened.
What happened? Or other things where you kind of know all the way through exactly what's going to happen, you still enjoy it through. And so I'm not saying one is bad or one's the other, but maybe kind of a healthy, fun compromise is being like, I know where we're going, but I don't know how we're going to get there. Right? Like, I mean, for me, for instance, I know that Shasta is going to be restored in some way. Mm-hmm. I'll get to that later on in the Daniel's Dilemma section. I have some thoughts, but I don't know how he's going to get there. I know at some point he'll have to meet Aslan. That's what happens in Narnia. I just don't know when or how. Yeah. And that's the exciting part, right?
Yeah, I can't confirm or deny any
that's fine. And I didn't mean to do too long of a little sidebar here. It's just something I think about a lot, especially it's like, no one spoiled. I don't watch the trailers. I don't want to know anything about it. And if that's you, that's fine. I'm not putting anyone, But it's also, I do think sometimes we make too big of a deal out of it when it's like a good story is a good story. A good story doesn't need to have you not know anything about it. If it's a good story, it will hold up. Right.
Two things that have helped with this are, one, knowing that any story has a happy ending as long as you stop it in the right spot. So it's the reason sequels are so hard is you had a good ending for the last one, or a happy ending, and now you have to create more conflict. So the two people that got together at the end of the last movie, now they have to have some relationship trouble. Iron Man 2. Iron Man 3.
I saw it once like 10 years ago, man.
Yeah, it's not your favorite. The other thing that helps is everybody dies eventually. So
correct.
Almost every story.
You've been reading the Iliad. I'm really proud of you. That's such a big, through line in the Iliad is the whole idea of meditation on death and stuff. So I'm really proud of you.
Well, even for that one, it was written a long time ago
Correct.
It was written a long time ago about characters from a war that happened a long time
ago. Even earlier. Yeah.
So they're probably all dead. It's just where they going.
Why did you say probably?
Because you don't know. There's like a 99.999% chance. We can both name some people who haven't died. Also, we haven't died yet.
No, but like, why do you say the characters from the Iliad are probably...
They're probably dead.
You don't have to say they're probably dead. They're dead.
What I said is true.
They're fictional characters.
They're probably dead.
Okay.
But if you know that going into it, and especially if the story's from a while ago, all the characters probably died. So it's just a matter of when it stopped. And that makes it a lot easier to read too, because now you're not worried about whether or not the character is going to make it. Like,
interesting.
They probably made it, but if they didn't, like, the other characters probably died later on too. Probably.
I'm moving on. All right, well, let's get back to Narnia here. Good little conversation, and thanks for answering my question. But let's talk a little bit more about this conversation as they have. So the Narnians decide, like you mentioned a little bit ago, Phil, they've got to get back to their ship. Once they get there, the consensus is that the Calormans cannot outrun them or outsail them on the water. And even if they did, they don't have a ship strong enough to take their own, the Narnian ship, down. So they feel pretty good, just like, hey, we've got to get down to the ship. There's the funny line that one of the dwarfs says, which is like, that's just as the beggar's only difficulty about riding is that he has no horse. I was like, is this? I had to think about like, wait, is this Trumpkin? And I was like, no, this is 1,000 years before Trumpkin. But they've got this problem here. And so what is the solution that Mr. Tumnus comes up with?
Wait, first he has to think very hard.
Is he
and
like
he says,
holding
he
his
says, yeah, he's
horns?
holding his horns. He's like, don't talk to me. Don't talk to me. I'm thinking really hard.
Is that a thing that fawns do?
Do you know anyone like that?
Well, I don't know anybody with horns, so it's a little difficult.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, there's some people where it's like, don't say anything. I have to write this down.
No, I can be like that sometimes. Yeah. I don't grab horns. I don't grab my hair. I don't do any of that stuff. I don't have like a cool symbol to show. Or I don't tie my hair up in a bow like that girl from the series of unfortunate events. You know, when she's thinking about inventing. Isn't that right? I think that's right.
And it's been a while.
We should go back and read those. I think I would really like the. No, I know not for the podcast. There are too many of them.
You don't have to clarify for me. You just need to clarify.
No. I don't want listeners to get their hopes up if someone's a big
Lemony
fan.
Snicket. It's a good series.
I never finished it.
Yeah, me either.
Yep, I got to like book 10.
Same with Animorphs.
Never. I did finish that one.
You did?
Talk about not having a happy ending.
Oh no.
No, seriously.
Spoiler alert.
Wow.
Man.
Okay, they finished the
What
books
did we
in like
just
the
talk
90s, I think. All right, but
You really do mean they.
yeah, K.A. Applegate did. There were like a ton of them that were ghostwritten. They were putting like 6 books a year. There's no way she was writing them all. And then you go look it up, and you're like, oh, she wrote like every 10th one. Good for her. She's making the money. Good for her.
Quick aside, if you want a real treat, look into how they made those covers, because I could not figure out how they were doing that. I thought maybe they're illustrating them by hand, but they're using a really cool computer program plus doing it by hand a little
Interesting.
bit. Yeah.
All I remember doing was just turning those pages to see the little kids, teenagers
Evolve.
like morph.
Oh yeah, like a
Evolved.
flip book.
It was morphed. Get your terminology right, in Animorph.
You were turning the pages
No, you
really
like,
slowly.
maybe you could flip
You
the
flip
pages.
them, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, fine. Semantics. So they do decide that Thomas comes up with an idea. Why don't you tell us what his idea is after he's held those horns?
They're going to pretend that Susan is leaning toward yes, and that they're preparing a big party, and that they have to get some stuff
Yeah.
from the ship.
Well, and
similar
they're gonna
to
have the party on the ship, right? Is that what's happening?
that's right. That they're not even getting supplies. They're going to go to the ship to
We're
get
gonna
it
have
ready.
the big party on the ship. Great idea by Tumnus.
That is a good idea. I wonder how big this ship is.
We
Also,
have
this
to-
is kind of like, you're at a family event and then you want to go. So you're like, I need to get something from my car.
And you just
then
waiting there
drive
until
away.
like mom shows up, and you're like, Mom, I've been waiting in the car for a long time.
I've never really had a bad family event, but that's what I imagined I would do if it was.
You never were
happen.
like that growing up at church where you're like, I want, it's like fellowship hour, and you're like, I just want to go home. I want to go home.
I used to do that at work. I would go sit in the car during lunch. Just,
Really?
yeah, to kind of warm up because it was so cold.
Where was this you were working at?
I'm not going to say where I was working.
Yeah, you're putting everyone on blast. Like I didn't like any of my coworkers. It was at this
I can't
job.
tell you the name, but I can give you the initials. It was C.I. It was a culinary institute.
Oh.
I'm kidding.
See, this is when you worked for the CIA. Okay. I was staring at him like, what does CIA spell? Sia? I don't get it.
That was the blankest look I've ever seen.
Oh,
I'm also upset that you didn't get my brush it under the rug joke about the cast of Avengers.
No, I don't get it.
They're dust.
Well, only half of them. So they're going to have this big party. They're going to be able to go out and grab food, and they're getting, I think they're getting performers. It's a great way for them to have an excuse to really and truly just pack up their ship. Now, we haven't seen this. They haven't seen this be put into effect, and I'm really interested to see if Shasta, who leaves them at the end of this chapter, if this is the last time Lewis lets us see them. I really want to find out how this goes over, but I'm actually a little concerned that Shasta's going to leave, so the narrative's going to follow him and just leave the Narnians on their own. I don't know.
They just had a brief appearance.
Yeah, I have to imagine they'll at least show up at the end because I think Shasta's going to make it to Narnia, but I don't know. So they decide to do all this. They're all going to go get ready, and then Mr. Tumnus, I think is he going to get food for?
Yeah, he goes to get a feast, get some lobster, I think, and then he comes back and he's giving him the meal and telling him all these great things that are going to happen.
Yeah, all these great things are going to happen to him when he gets to Archenland, and that he's going to be eventually brought up to Peter to be a knight in Narnia. So
he's going to get his next suit of armor. He's going to learn how to joust.
Exactly. So we realize that Narnia and Archenland must be allies of some kind if there's this positive relationship between the two. Then Shasta's left alone, and there's some really interesting little character moments for him. Maybe just one character moment, which is Shasta is concerned as to what to do. He's kind of stayed there the whole time. He has not said, hey, like, I'm not Prince Corin. I'm actually from Calormen myself. Mm-hmm. I'm fleeing Calormen, but that's the culture I grew up in. That's the land I grew up in. And what's so interesting about this is he has a lot of presuppositions here that are entirely wrong, but tell us a lot about how he thinks. He doesn't want to say, hey, I'm not Prince Corin, because he's afraid that they'll reject him.
Right.
And then he's like, well, maybe if I am from Narnia and I have 2 talking horses from Narnia, maybe we will get along, but there's no way they'll accept Aravis. Aravis is from Calormen. And they're like, oh, he just assumes that they'll sell her as a slave or send her back to her father. So he's like, I guess I can't do this, right? And then he says, well, if they knew that I wasn't one of them themselves, like I wasn't a Narnian myself, he's a little afraid that they'll kill him, send him back to the Tisserach, right? And if the real Corin turns up at any moment, they will. So he's like, that's why I've got to do this. I've got to actually just leave because eventually I'm going to be caught. What do you make of the way that he's thinking here?
I think he's never learned better. Mm-hmm. We know the people from Narnia wouldn't do that, but he doesn't. And you have to think he's only really interacted with the person who is standing in as his father, and then maybe a few other people in the town. But small town plus not a great father figure. All that kind of adds up to he's going to act this way.
Yeah, he has this extremely cynical and honestly just pessimistic worldview, that his assumption is that people are just going to hurt him or not trust him. I mean, this is like, he's got like some childhood trauma here, right? Of kind of not being able to trust anybody. Yeah. Now, again, like this is a situation where maybe you shouldn't trust these people. You don't know them at all yet. But we see that the motivation for that is not necessarily because, hey, this might not be safe. It's, oh, everyone must just be evil and want to, be out to get me or at least want to hurt me or not see me thrive or succeed.
Right. Because it's not 100% selfish. He is thinking about
Aravis.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, right? He is actually thinking about her, which is already, I feel like, a change of character, or at least a change in their relationship, because he seemed to really not like her in the last 2 chapters where they've met. But he's like, like that wouldn't be good for her, right?
Right.
So he doesn't think about this too much, because that's when Mr. Tumnus actually comes back in and gives him his meal, and then Shasta goes off to sleep. But then he is awoken. What happens?
A vase falls on the floor.
Shatters on the floor as somebody doing the high school trick, sneaking back into the window
right.
to not get caught here. And we meet Prince Corin. But he looks a little different.
He does. He has a black eye.
He's got a black eye.
He's described as not looking like anyone at that particular moment because he has this huge black eye.
And why has he gotten this black eye?
Oh, man. I would love how this story was told.
Yeah, tell us about it.
Someone says something about Susan, so he picks a fight with them. And then someone else comes after him, and he fights them. And he keeps winning until a group beats him. And then they're about to carry him off, and then he offers them some wine. And then they have some wine, and then he sneaks off and then sees the original guy again, and then beats him, and then he finally comes home because it's starting to get light up. No, first he beats the person, then he climbs up on a roof, and then he lays low for a little bit, and then he goes. Yeah, and climbs at the window. He's had a big night.
He has had a busy. Well, it's been more than one night, right? Because doesn't he wait till the next morning? I was confused. I honestly was confused about this.
He's had a busy few days. That's right. They were worried about him.
Yeah, he seems like he's been gone for at least a day.
Right.
So that also tells us a little bit about this city, which is that this city is enormous.
Yeah.
Right? Probably larger than anything we've encountered in the Chronicles of Narnia so far. I mean, we haven't really seen many towns in Narnia besides Baruna in Caspian. Mm-hmm. And so this is quite a large city. If he can be gone, obviously there's a lot of things getting in his way, but it's not like they can just go, oh, we missed that guy. Like, there are big fights happening on another side of the city, and the Narnians have no idea about it. It's with the prince and other people, and they still don't know.
That whole passage really helps to enhance the scale that we're at, because they didn't hear about this conflict. News of it didn't even make it.
It's weird that this, and you kind of get, we don't know much about Prince Corin, but you understand a little bit of him as he goes back in to his own bedroom, finds someone else that looks exactly like him. He says, "Who are you?" The guy says, Shasta says, "I'm nobody in particular." And Corin's response pretty quickly after that is, "Well, don't hurry out. Like, we can have a lot of fun by both looking alike." Like,
right.
This dude has just been chased down by other people, and he goes into a room where another guy looks exactly like you, and his response is like, "Dude, this is pretty fun."
Yeah.
Not like, "Who are you? Why do you look like me? Get out of my room. Why are you in my bed?" But hey, we could have a lot of fun with this. So this guy is a little bit of a prankster, you guess.
Yes. And right after Shasta says, "You should tell them the truth," the prince says, "What else am I going to tell them?" So he's both it sounds like he's an honest person with a really fun, kind of mischievous personality.
Well, and there's this other, like, kind of this foil in some ways to Shasta here, because Corin's presupposition is absolutely, why would I lie about this thing? Whereas Shasta never even considered telling the truth.
Right.
Right? And so you see this
They look the same, but they're very different.
Exactly.
There's also a great moment where the prince says, "Is there anything to drink?" And Shasta says, "No, I drank it." They're completely out of, I guess they don't have running water. That makes sense.
Yeah.
You have to go all the way downstairs.
Like, and good for Corin. He just doesn't seem as bothered as I would be if when I went home tonight, there was another person who looks just like me in my bed or in my house, just in general.
Drinking all your water.
Drinking all my water. And the wine. Wasn't there like white wine earlier too?
Oh, yeah. So then here at the end, we have some goodbyes, and we also discovered that they're becoming friends.
It seems like it.
Yeah.
Shasta goes back out the window himself as someone else is coming in, and Prince Corin says, like, "Hey, if you ever go to Archenland, you can go to my father and tell him that we're friends, and you better get out of here, somebody coming." And that's another kind of little cliffhanger here.
Yes, I really love that very smooth transition. It must make it very difficult for you.
Well, as soon as we push the record button again to turn this off, I can go ahead and read again.
That's right.
So, but yeah, that leads us right into chapter 6. So we'll end chapter 5 here, but next time we're going to be back with chapter 6, which is called Shasta Among the Tombs. So this is very intriguing to me because I didn't think we were leaving the city so quickly, but maybe we are.
Well, before we do listener feedback, I think it's time for Daniel's dilemma.
Yeah. All right. So
what is your dilemma today?
Here's my prediction. All right. I really think this is right. I'm feeling good about this one. After going through 5 chapters here, I think it has to be, at least it's pretty obvious to me, that Shasta and Corin must be twin brothers.
Okay.
Why else would they look alike?
Clones.
There could be like magical spells, or maybe they're clones. This is the science fiction book no one mentions about Narnia. But I'm going to go ahead and say that Shasta is not actually a Narnian himself.
Okay.
He is an Archenlander, if that's what they're called. And he's the prince. He's one of the princes of Archenlander, and this is his twin brother. That's why they look exactly alike, and that's why they were so easily, because they were also close to Corin. Like, to me, they can't just look similar. Because if they just look similar, like Edmund and Susan would notice. They're like, you kind of look like that guy. Like, I think they have to be identical twins, so they really don't know that it's another guy.
Okay.
So that is what I believe.
All right.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good prediction.
I really am feeling good about that one.
Excellent.
But before we go, I'm feeling good. Let's continue with one final great thing here, and that is some listener feedback from Neil Daniels on YouTube. We got listener feedback here on YouTube. Why did I say it like that? I was really excited about
YouTube.
it. I sound like I was like
it's
on a radio
new site
show.
that you're really gonna like.
So he actually commented on the hiatus episode we did with Dr. Louis Marcos and asked a great question that I thought would fit in well with the conversation that we had today on stories. So he wrote in one of our comments, he wrote this, or on that video, he wrote this. He said, it's a very insightful podcast regarding C.S. Lewis. One question that has come up in discussing this with others, though, this is his question, are Marvel movies and stories part of the wish fulfillment category of movies, or is it something else? To give a little bit of background in case maybe someone didn't hear that hiatus episode, Lewis talks a lot about school stories. This idea that he thought people should be pushed towards more books with more fantastical elements and away from becoming the head cheerleader or the head sports star or something, because he said that actually that filled kids' mind often could lead to arrogance and stuff. This is what Lewis said. And if you haven't heard that, you can go back to that episode with Dr. Marcos when he talks a lot more about it than I just did. So this is a great question from Neil. Phil, what does this mean? Would you consider things like Marvel movies, for instance, to be part of that wish fulfillment category of media?
I think it definitely fits in that category, but we also need to acknowledge that they are trying a lot harder to not have it. It's not just wish fulfillment. They're also being very careful with the arrogance part of it as well. An example is Captain America. You have this character who is beat up on, and he does want to do better stuff, and then he suddenly gets the ability to, but he uses it in a good way. Meanwhile, that's contrasted with, we have these other characters who they didn't really suffer that much, and then they want that power too, and they give everything to get it, and it ends up destroying them. So I feel like there are quite a few warnings built in. A little bit different than, I really want to be the cool kid at school, kind of like the what was that MTV show that like everyone just wanted to be prom king?
The Sweet 16 show? I don't know. No, I did not
like,
watch a lot of MTV
they would like
growing up.
Give someone like a makeover and a bunch of tips.
Extreme Makeover? No, that's not an MTV show.
MTV Made. That's what it was. Did you ever see that?
MTV Made. I'm not familiar with the program.
Yeah.
It sounds great. I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah, please don't. Definitely not recommending it. But from the 1 or 2 episodes I saw, it seemed like everyone wanted to be prom king. But what they don't pack in there is there's a downside to some of that stuff. And you don't see that. You just see the, quote, happy ending where they win, if they win.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And you know, I think this is a place where I might not even agree with Lewis about the idea of school stories. I don't think that school stories, I'm using kind of his terminology here, are inherently bad. I think they can easily slip into something that does kind of breed arrogance, but I don't think they have to do that. I think it depends on how a story is told, how it's then also just how it's received too. So I'm not someone who's like, no, like only fantasy books in my classroom kind of thing at all. That's not how I feel. But when it comes to something like Marvel, for instance, I think it really depends. Yeah. I think you have characters like Peter Parker or Miles Morales. I think with Spider-Man, it is abundantly clear that it really is not all that great. Yeah. That this is not would it be cool to swing through the city? Yeah. Yes.
But there's a responsibility that comes with that great power. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. But I mean, like, even, I was really big. I read a ton of Spider-Man comics growing up. I read most of Stan Lee's original run on the series. And then I was in the 2000s, I was reading what was coming out. I'd get it in the mail, every couple of weeks. So I've read a lot of Spider-Man. And I think what did appeal to me, because he's my favorite superhero, and what appealed about him to me was the fact that he was relatable. He is. He's very relatable. I mean, Superman's not relatable. Batman's not relatable in a lot of ways. Spider-Man was going through a lot of the same problems I had as a kid, right? Really? No, but like school, like homework, like not like, he was awkward. He was, especially if you go back and read those early.
Well, to be fair, it is awkward to be 26 years old
in high school still.
And be in high school like Tobey Maguire
was. Like Tobey Maguire was the best Spider-Man. And that is, we will take a hard position. The Lamppost listener believes that Tobey Maguire is the... Wait, you really don't?
No. I really enjoyed those movies, but I feel like the other Spider-Man movies... Spider-Man? I think the other Spider-Man movies are better.
Who is a better Peter Parker?
The current one. Tom... what's his face?
I can't remember the last name, but I like him a lot. But just like, dude, we grew up with Tobey Maguire. It feels like you're betraying him.
He was too old for that role.
It's funny because I had such a hard time with
he's probably not
Caspian
coming on the show now.
And, But doesn't bother me with Spider-Man. Totally fine. I think Tobey Maguire did a great job really hitting that Peter Parker side and that Spider-Man side. I think Andrew Garfield did a great job as Peter Parker and not a great as Spider-Man. And I like, what's the other guy you just said? Tom Holland. I think he's really great as Spider-Man, and I just don't relate as much to his Peter Parker. And that could totally just be because I'm an adult now.
Right.
Like, when the first Spider-Man movie came out, I was in 6th grade, I think. And so I really was like this. I felt seen. There was this nerdy guy who, and I mean, I had already been reading the comics at that point. But with Tom Holland, it's like, well, like he's going to homecoming and I'm, married.
Right.
So I maybe don't relate to it as much as I used to.
You know what would really help? If they could just make one more origin story and just really explain how did Spider-Man come to be, I think that would be great.
But getting back to this idea of wish fulfillment, I think it depends on the character. Like I said, I do think, like you mentioned with some of the other Marvel characters, I think it is often clear that this is like they're people to look up to. Many of them are flawed too, and I think in general, actually, let me say this for a second. I do think that one of the reasons we see such a popularity in the Marvel movies and yet DC just continues to struggle, some of that's like, behind the scenes stuff, but I think another part of it too is Marvel's superheroes have always been more like human. Whereas with DC, with maybe the exception of Batman, if you think about Justice League, you have these more like godlike superheroes. Superman is not very human.
Right.
Yeah, and some of the comic book stuff you might get, and maybe if you think about some of those TV shows they made of him and stuff. But in general, if you go watch, Christopher Reeve as Superman, you don't go, oh, really human guy. No, he's Superman, you know? And so I think some of those can maybe wander into this wish fulfillment territory or category of things. But I think when it comes to, especially with Marvel, I think the fantastical elements of the MCU are actually stronger still than the human elements of it. Now, this still does have strong human elements, but like when I go watch Guardians of the Galaxy, yes, does Peter Quill have some elements of him and family and drama and stuff that do resonate with me as a human watching it? Yes. Is that the reason I keep coming back? No, it has cool songs and the visuals look great and it's really funny.
Right.
And so I think that element is actually the fantasy element. The world is interesting. I want to see the cool, not weapons, but like the suits or whatever they're called that Iron Man has. All of those things are much more in the science fiction fantasy realm, Doctor Strange, all these things. And they are mixed well with the human element, but that's not the only kind of main thing. And so, I mean, this is a tricky one. I'm sure that some of our listeners would disagree. I mean, Neil's asked us a great question because it is not necessarily easy to answer.
I agree.
Do you have any other thoughts on it?
I just want to reiterate that there's a responsibility that comes with making stories like this, especially if they're going to be so popular. And I think that for the most part, Marvel recently has done an amazing job with that, where they're showing, here are the really positive parts of having this ability, but here are also some of the negatives. Even with a character like Iron Man from the very beginning, back in 2008 when that came out, he's a billionaire who ends up making this suit that gives him even more powers. But you also see the downsides of some of that, especially as that trilogy kind of comes to an end.
I have been pleasantly surprised. And maybe that's just because I thought maybe I had the bar so low. But I have been pleasantly surprised with the way that Marvel has told their stories, in that most of their superheroes are people I would consider to be pretty good role models. Right? Yeah. Like people, I'm like, yeah, like when my students get excited for, any character, whether it's Captain America or Black Panther or, whomever, I'm like, yeah, like those are actually like pretty good people to look up to as far as superheroes go. No, they're not real people. And like, you don't ever forget that because they aren't real. Yeah. But as far as cool superheroes go, they're actually portrayed in ways that they're not, doing a lot of like kind of wild stuff. You even like Bruce Wayne, who's like got the whole like playboy kind of lifestyle, it's not necessarily the best thing to look up to, even if it's kind of this persona he puts on. he's also like I would say someone like Batman, who I really do like, is not necessarily someone who's a good role model.
Yeah.
And maybe I think that's why we're attracted to him, because he's this very kind of like disturbed man who like he needs help. He dresses like a bat, you know? Whereas these other maybe Marvel superheroes are, you know, seemingly like decent people, which is kind of cool in the 21st century to have them be so popular and for the most part be
positive.
Be positive, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that answered Neil's question to some extent. I think if I have to be in a camp, I would say no, they kind of go outside of wish fulfillment into something greater, but they could easily steer into that territory. So you always have to be careful about those things. Or not like be careful, like don't enjoy them, but just just understand how it's affecting us and how it's affecting the way that we think and act in those things.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Well, Phil, do you want to go ahead and wrap us up here?
I do. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you too can listen to a bonus episode each month, along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Elias Dean, Hannah Anderson, John Marr, Emily Margaret, and Ryan Smith for supporting us at our top tiers. Thanks to you all. Do you have any listener feedback? Email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. A review on Apple Podcasts would also be appreciated, as it helps other listeners find the show and join our read-through. Thanks for coming along on this journey, and we will be back next time with Chapter 6.